You never threw tantrums, you never asked for too much. You got good grades, stayed quiet when things got tense, and somehow always knew how to make the people around you feel okay even when you weren't. Everyone called you the good one, and you smiled, because that felt like love. But here's what nobody told you. That goodness, a lot of it wasn't a choice, it was a survival strategy. And somewhere along the way you started disappearing inside of it. Think about a child. Maybe you recognize this child. She's 7 years old. Her parents are stressed, money is tight, or there's tension in the house, or one parent is emotionally unavailable and the other is trying to hold everything together. The air in the house has a feeling to it, a kind of pressure, not loud, just heavy. And this child, without anyone telling her, learns something. She learns that when she's quiet, things go smoother. When she gets good grades, her mom smiles. When she doesn't cry about the thing that hurt her, her dad seems relieved. When she handles things on her own, people say she's so mature for her age. And that one phrase, becomes the blueprint for the rest of her life. So she keeps being mature, she keeps being easy, she keeps folding herself into whatever shape the room needs her to be. By the time she's an adult, she doesn't even notice she's doing it anymore. It's just who she is, or at least that's what she thinks. Here's the psychological truth that most people never hear. Children are not born knowing how to be good. Goodness, the kind that's rigid, constant, people-pleasing, and self-erasing, is learned. And it's almost always learned in response to something that felt unsafe. Not unsafe like danger. Unsafe like my emotions are too much for this space. Unsafe like love here is conditional. Unsafe like if I take up too much room, something bad will happen. Psychologists call this a response to an environment that couldn't fully hold the child's emotional world. And when a child learns that being small, being easy, being good keeps the peace, that child begins to emotionally regulate not just themselves, but everyone around them. That is not maturity. That is a coping mechanism dressed up as a personality trait. And the terrifying part? It works so well that nobody, not even the child, realizes what it's costing them. Let's pause for a moment. Think about your own childhood, not the big events, the small ones, the moments when you swallowed something you felt because it didn't feel safe to say it out loud. The times you helped when you didn't want to, the times you performed okayness when you were anything but okay. How many times did you do that? How many years? Here's where it gets deeper. The good child doesn't just learn to suppress their needs. They learn to be ashamed of having them, because here's what the message was, even if no one ever said it directly: your needs are inconvenient. Your sadness is a burden. Your anger is dangerous. Your desire for more is selfish. So the good child becomes an adult who apologizes for needing things, who feels guilty when they say no, who has a near physical inability to ask for help without immediately minimizing the ask, who in relationships gives and gives and gives, and then one day with no warning feels completely empty and doesn't understand why. They don't understand why because they were never taught to recognize their own hunger. They were taught to feed everyone else first and call that love. And the loneliness that comes with that, the specific, quiet, invisible loneliness of someone who is surrounded by people who need them but truly known by no one, that loneliness is one of the most underrepresented forms of emotional pain in existence. You might know someone like this, or you might be someone like this. The friend who everyone leans on, who never leans back. The partner who anticipates every need, who you've never actually had to ask for anything, who you one day realize you don't actually know that well because they've been a mirror for so long they stopped showing you themselves. The sibling who stayed out of all the family drama, who seemed fine, who everyone assumed was fine. The employee who never complains, always delivers, always picks up the slack, who one day, quietly, burns out so completely they can barely get out of bed. These are not failures of character. These are the long-term costs of a childhood spent learning that love had to be earned through self-erasure. Now here's the part that might be hard to hear. A lot of good children grow up and find themselves in relationships, romantic, platonic, even professional, that quietly replicate the original dynamic. They find people who need them, people who are emotionally unavailable, people who consciously or not benefit from having someone around who asks for nothing and gives everything. Not because the good child is broken, but because the familiar feels like home, even when home was the thing that hurt them. There's a term in psychology for this: repetition compulsion. The unconscious drive to recreate past relational dynamics in an attempt to finally, this time, get a different outcome, to finally be loved completely without conditions, without having to shrink. But it almost never works that way. Because the good child doesn't just attract a certain type of person. They attract a certain type of dynamic, one where their needs remain invisible, their effort remains unreciprocated, and the cycle quietly continues. And the cruelest part, when they finally do meet someone who offers them genuine, uncomplicated care, someone who actually wants to know how they're doing, who doesn't need them to hold anything together, the good child often doesn't know what to do with it. It feels unfamiliar. It feels like too much. Sometimes it actually feels like a threat. Because if they're not useful, if they're not needed, if they're not performing goodness, then who are they? That's the question that lives at the very center of this wound. Take a breath. Sit with that for a second. Who are you when no one needs anything from you? If that question makes you feel vaguely anxious or blank or uncomfortable, that's important information. That discomfort is pointing at something real. Here's the shift I want you to consider. The goodness you developed wasn't a flaw, it was intelligence. It was a child's brilliant adaptive response to a world that didn't have enough room for all of them. You figured out the rules, you survived by them, but you are not a child anymore. And the rules you built your life around, be easy, be helpful, be small, never need too much, those rules were never universal truths. They were just the truths of one particular environment at one particular time when you had no other options. You have other options now. The healing, if we can call it that, doesn't happen by suddenly becoming selfish or shutting people out. It happens in much quieter, much more terrifying moments. The moment you tell someone you're not okay and stay in the room instead of immediately fixing it for them. The moment you ask for something without apologizing for the ask. The moment you feel the pull to shrink and don't. The moment you let yourself be a little harder to love and discover that the right people love you anyway. Because here's the truth, you were never too much. You were never too needy, too emotional, too complicated. You were a child who needed more than you got in a space that couldn't give it, and you adapted in the most human way possible. You made yourself smaller so the love you did receive would feel more stable. That wasn't weakness, that was survival. But survival and living are not the same thing. And you deserve, not as a reward, not after you fixed enough things or helped enough people or proved yourself worthy enough, you deserve right now as you are to take up space, to have needs, to be known, not just as the one who holds it all together, but as a person, a full, complicated, sometimes messy, entirely human person. That is not a lot to ask for, that is the bare minimum. And if some part of you deep down still doesn't believe you deserve it, that's the part of you that still needs the most care. Start there.